Welcome back. If you're watching this, this is for you. Because at some point, maybe recently, maybe for years, you have had this feeling. This quiet, persistent, almost impossible to shake feeling that you are capable of so much more than what your life is currently reflecting. That the financial freedom, the abundance, the version of yourself you know exists somewhere inside you, is real, is possible, is yours. And yet something keeps getting in the way. Not bad luck, not the wrong circumstances, not the wrong strategy or the wrong timing or the wrong people around you. Something closer than any of that. Something that knows exactly when to show up, exactly what to say, and exactly how to make staying small feel like the reasonable, responsible, intelligent choice. That something has a name, and in one of the most profound and least known books in the personal development space, The School of Gods by Stefano Elio D'Anna, it is called The Enemy Within. I read this book and felt like someone had finally named something I had been wrestling with my entire life. And today I want to share what it taught me in the simplest, most honest way I can. This is part 1 of a series, and trust me, you are going to want to stay for all of it. Welcome, and if you are new here, hit subscribe and grab the free PDF and book recommendations linked in the description below. Let me ask you something that I think most people never stop long enough to actually ask themselves. When things are not working in your life, when the financial freedom feels out of reach, when the same patterns keep repeating themselves no matter how much you try to change them, when you know what you want and you know you are capable of having it, and yet something keeps pulling you back, who do you blame? Be honest, really honest. Most of us, if we are truthful about it, look outward. We blame the economy, the market conditions, the people around us, the circumstances we were born into, the opportunities that did not show up, the ones that did show up and somehow still did not work out. We blame bad timing. We blame bad luck. We blame the system. And sometimes, honestly, the system deserves some of that blame. But here is the question that the School of Gods asks, quietly, persistently, and with a kind of precision that is almost uncomfortable. What if the most powerful force working against you has nothing to do with any of that? What if the real obstacle, the one that has been there through every failed attempt, every plateau, every moment where you got close to a breakthrough and somehow ended up back at the beginning, is not out there at all? What if it is in here? This is the central premise of Stefano Elio D'Anna's remarkable book. And I want to be honest with you about my reaction the first time I truly absorbed it, because I think it mirrors what a lot of people feel when they encounter this idea for the first time. Part of me resisted it completely, because it is so much more comfortable to believe that the obstacles are external. If the problem is out there, in the economy, in other people, in circumstances beyond your control, then you are off the hook. You are the victim of a story that is happening to you, not the author of one that you are creating. And there is a strange, seductive comfort in that position, even when it costs you everything. But D'Anna does not let you stay in that comfort, and neither, honestly, does real life if you are paying attention. I think about my years inside the financial and insurance world. From the outside, the obstacles looked entirely external. Difficult clients, competitive markets, a corporate structure that rewarded conformity over creativity and time over results. And those things were real. I am not dismissing them. But when I look back now, with the clarity that distance and genuine inner work provide, I can see something I could not see at the time. The external obstacles were significant, but they were not what was really keeping me stuck. What was keeping me stuck was something I carried into every meeting, every client relationship, every financial decision I made. Something that shaped how I saw opportunities, how I responded to challenges, how I interpreted my own value and my own potential. Something so familiar, so woven into the fabric of how I experienced myself and the world, that I had completely stopped noticing it. D'Anna calls this the enemy within, and he describes it in a way that I think is both deeply confronting and profoundly liberating. It is not a dramatic, obvious saboteur. It is not the voice that screams at you or the fear that paralyzes you in obvious ways. It is far more subtle than that, far more sophisticated, far more deeply embedded in your daily experience. It is the small self, the conditioned self, the version of you that was assembled, piece by piece, from everything the world told you about who you are, what you deserve, what is realistic, what is safe, and what is possible for someone like you. It is the character you inherited rather than chose, built from other people's fears, other people's limitations, other people's definitions of what a good, reasonable, responsible human life looks like. And here is what makes it so difficult to see clearly. It does not feel like an enemy. It feels like you. It speaks in your voice. It uses your memories, your experiences, your personal history as evidence for its conclusions. It is intimately familiar with every doubt you have ever had, every failure you have ever experienced, every moment where you tried and it did not work out. And it uses all of that material skillfully, efficiently, almost lovingly to construct the most convincing possible case for staying exactly where you are. In financial terms, I think of it as a hidden liability on your personal balance sheet, something that does not show up in any obvious column, that does not announce itself as a cost, but that is quietly, consistently draining your energetic and creative resources, capping your income potential, and keeping your financial reality locked inside boundaries that were drawn by someone else a very long time ago. You cannot see it on the surface, but you can feel its effects everywhere. In the opportunities you almost took, in the version of financial freedom that always seems just slightly out of reach, in the quiet, persistent gap between what you know you are capable of and what your life is currently reflecting back to you. And the first step, the most important step, the one that everything else depends on, is simply to see it, to stop looking outward for the source of your limitations and turn, with courage and with honesty, inward. Because you cannot defeat an enemy you refuse to acknowledge exists. And in our next block, we are going to look at exactly how this enemy operates, the specific, subtle, almost invisible ways it keeps you small. Because once you see the mechanism clearly, it begins to lose its power over you. So now we have named it, the enemy within. The small, conditioned, inherited version of yourself that has been quietly running the show, not through dramatic sabotage or obvious self-destruction, but through something far more subtle and far more effective than that. And now comes the question that I think is the most practically important one in this entire conversation, because knowing that the enemy exists is one thing. Understanding exactly how it operates, the specific mechanisms it uses to keep you stuck, small, and safe inside a life that was never truly yours, that is where the real awareness begins. Because here is the thing about the enemy within that D'Anna describes so precisely in the School of Gods. It does not fight you directly. It does not show up as an obvious obstacle that you can identify, confront, and overcome through sheer willpower or determination. If it did, it would be easy to defeat. You would see it coming. You would know exactly what you were dealing with. Instead, it operates through disguise, through familiarity, through the most sophisticated camouflage available to any internal resistance. It makes itself indistinguishable from your own voice. Think about that for a moment. The enemy within does not speak to you as an adversary. It speaks to you as a friend, as a protector, as the reasonable, practical, experienced part of yourself that has been around long enough to know how things really work. It uses the language of wisdom, of caution, of self-awareness. And it delivers its limitations wrapped so carefully in the appearance of good sense that you thank it for the advice. I remember exactly how this sounded in my own life during my years in the financial world. It did not say, "You are not good enough to have the life you want." That would have been too obvious, too easy to reject. Instead, it said things like, "Be realistic. You have a good thing here. Why risk it?" People who leave stable careers for something uncertain are being irresponsible. Financial freedom sounds great in theory, but you have seen what happens when people get too ambitious. Every single one of those thoughts felt reasonable, felt measured, felt like the voice of experience rather than the voice of limitation. And that is precisely what made them so effective. The enemy within is most powerful not when it sounds like fear, but when it sounds like wisdom. D'Anna describes this with a clarity that stopped me completely when I first read it. He talks about how the conditioned self, the enemy within, is essentially a survival mechanism that was built to keep you safe inside familiar territory, and it is extraordinarily good at its job. Every time you approach the boundary of your comfort zone, every time a genuine opportunity for growth, for financial expansion, for a life beyond the familiar ceiling presents itself, the enemy within activates. Not to hurt you, but to protect you, to pull you back inside the boundaries it knows, to keep you in the territory it considers safe. And in financial terms, this is where I have seen it operate most visibly and most consistently, both in my own life and in the lives of clients I have worked with. It shows up in the moment just before a significant financial decision, in the hesitation before asking for what you are worth, in the sudden flood of practical objections that appears every time a genuine wealth-building opportunity presents itself, in the quiet but persistent voice that says, "This is probably too good to be true," or "People like us don't usually get to have things like that." It is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is not a lack of ambition or intelligence or faith. It is the enemy within doing exactly what it was built to do, protecting you from the unfamiliar, even when the unfamiliar is exactly where your freedom lies. And the most important thing to understand about how it operates is this: it feeds on unconsciousness. It thrives in the dark. The moment you bring genuine, honest, clear awareness to it, the moment you catch it in the act and recognize it for what it is rather than accepting it as truth, it begins to lose its grip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but measurably and permanently. Because awareness is the one thing the enemy within cannot survive. It is built for the shadows, built for the unexamined corners of your consciousness where its voice can pass as your own without question. The moment you shine a light on it, the moment you say, "I see you, and I know what you are," the disguise starts to fail. And that moment of recognition, that clear, honest, courageous seeing, is exactly what we are going to talk about next. So now we understand how the enemy within operates. Not through dramatic sabotage or obvious self-destruction, but through disguise. Through the sophisticated camouflage of reasonable, practical, protective-sounding thoughts that feel so much like wisdom that you thank them for showing up. And now I want to talk about something that I think most personal development conversations avoid, because it is uncomfortable, because it requires a level of honesty that most of us would rather not sit with for too long. I want to talk about the real cost. Not the philosophical cost, not the abstract, theoretical cost of living below your potential in some vague, unmeasurable sense. The actual, concrete, specific cost of leaving the enemy within unexamined. Of going through another year, another 5 years, another decade, with that internal saboteur quietly running the show beneath everything you are consciously trying to build. Because D'Anna is very clear about this in the School of Gods. The enemy within is not a minor inconvenience. It is not a small drag on your overall performance that you can compensate for with enough strategy and effort. It is the single most expensive presence in your entire life. And the longer it operates unexamined, the higher the bill becomes. Let me bring this into the financial world specifically, because this is where I have seen the cost most clearly and most undeniably. Think about the income ceiling, that invisible but absolutely real limit that seems to follow certain people regardless of how hard they work, how many strategies they apply, how many times they reinvent their approach. They grow to a certain point, and then something pulls them back. Not the market, not bad luck, not external circumstances, something internal. Something that has decided at a level below conscious awareness that this is the limit, that this is as far as someone like them gets to go. That ceiling is the enemy within made financial. It is the conditioned self setting the boundaries of your abundance and then using every tool at its disposal to make sure you stay inside them. I had a client once who was one of the most talented, most driven, most genuinely capable people I had worked with in years. She had everything that should have translated into significant financial success, and she kept hitting the same wall. Every time her income approached a certain level, something would happen. An unexpected expense that wiped out the gains. A client that disappeared at exactly the wrong moment. A decision that made complete sense at the time but pulled her back, almost magnetically, to exactly where she had started. When we started looking honestly at the enemy within, at the specific internal voice that activated every time she approached that financial threshold, we found it immediately. A deeply held, completely unconscious belief that significant wealth attracted problems. That financial expansion was inevitably followed by loss. That the safe thing, the smart thing, was to stay within a familiar ceiling. She was not making bad decisions. She was making perfectly logical decisions from the perspective of an enemy within that had decided her financial safety lived below a certain line. And every year she spent without seeing that clearly was another year of compounded cost, not just in income, in confidence, in the slow erosion of trust in her own potential, in the accumulating weight of a life lived at a fraction of its actual capacity. This is what D'Anna means when he talks about the price of the conditioned self. It is not just what you lose financially, though that cost is real and significant. It is what you lose in terms of who you are becoming, Because every year you spend letting the enemy within make your decisions is a year you spend becoming more of the conditioned self and less of the person you actually came here to be. And here is the part that I find most sobering about this, and most motivating at the same time. The cost is not static. It compounds, just like interest on debt. And I say that as someone who spent years in the financial world watching this principle operate in both directions. Leave a limiting belief unexamined for long enough, and it does not just stay the same size. It grows. It deepens. It becomes more entrenched, more automatic, more indistinguishable from reality. But here is the other side of that compounding principle, the one that gives me genuine hope every time I think about it. Awareness compounds too. Every moment of genuine clarity about the enemy within. Every time you catch it in the act, name it honestly, and choose differently, that builds too. That accumulates. That creates a momentum of its own that grows stronger and more natural with every conscious choice. Which means that the most valuable financial investment you will ever make is not in a stock, not in a business, not in a strategy or a system or a course. It is in the honest, courageous, sometimes uncomfortable work of seeing the enemy within clearly and beginning, one conscious moment at a time, to take back the territory it has been occupying in your life. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about in our final block. Not as a theory, but as a real, practical, immediately applicable shift that you can begin today. Here we are, the final piece of this first part of our series. And I want to start by saying something that I think is important before we talk about anything practical. Confronting the enemy within is not a one-time event. It is not a single dramatic moment of clarity after which everything changes and the internal saboteur disappears forever. D'Anna is very honest about this in The School of Gods, and I think that honesty is one of the things that makes the book so genuinely useful rather than just inspiring. This is a practice, a daily, ongoing, sometimes uncomfortable practice of choosing awareness over unconsciousness, of catching the enemy within in the act, again and again and again, and making a different choice each time. Not perfectly, not without resistance, but consistently. And with the understanding that every single conscious choice, however small, is a withdrawal from the enemy's account and a deposit into your own. So where do you actually start? The first and most important step, and D'Anna returns to this again and again throughout the book, is simply to observe, not to fight, not to suppress, not to white-knuckle your way past the enemy within through sheer force of will, but to observe it, to develop the capacity to watch your own internal experience with enough distance and enough honesty to catch the enemy within operating in real time. In practical terms, this means developing what I think of as the observer habit, the practice of pausing in the moments that matter most, the moments where a decision is being made or an opportunity is being evaluated or a familiar pattern is beginning to activate, and asking a very simple, very honest question. Is this thought coming from the version of me I want to become? Or is this the enemy within speaking? Not as a judgment, not as self-criticism, just as a genuine, curious, honest inquiry into the source of the thought. Because the enemy within, as sophisticated as it is, has a tell. It almost always speaks in the language of contraction, of pulling back, of making the familiar seem safer and the unknown seem more dangerous than it actually is. It specializes in reasonable-sounding arguments for staying exactly where you are. And your true self, the version of you that exists beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the inherited limitations, beneath all the borrowed beliefs about what is possible for someone like you, speaks a different language entirely. It speaks in the language of expansion, of genuine excitement, of the quiet but unmistakable knowing that something more is available, and that you are capable of stepping into it. Learning to tell the difference between those two voices, that is the work. And it starts with observation. I remember when I first began applying this in my own financial life. The enemy within was loudest in the moments just before a significant decision. Every time I was about to make a move that the conditioned version of me considered risky, leaving the corporate structure, stepping into my own financial authority, trusting my own judgment over the judgment of the system I had been trained inside, the enemy within would activate immediately. Loudly. With a very convincing array of practical, reasonable, responsible-sounding objections. And for a long time, I listened. I called it wisdom. I called it due diligence. I called it being smart about risk. But once I started observing it clearly, once I developed enough distance to recognize the voice of the conditioned self, Rather than automatically identifying with it, something shifted. I could hear the argument. I could acknowledge the fear underneath it. And then I could make a conscious choice about whether to follow it or not. Not always perfectly, not without discomfort, but consciously. And that consciousness, that simple, powerful, completely available act of choosing awareness over automatic reaction, is where the enemy within begins to lose its grip. D'Anna describes this beautifully. He talks about how the conditioned self, the enemy within, begins to dissolve not through force but through light, through the sustained, honest, courageous application of conscious awareness to the places inside yourself where the enemy has been operating in the dark. And here is what I want you to take from this first video in our series. The one thing I hope lands most deeply and most usefully. You are not your enemy within. You never were. The conditioned self, the small, fearful, inherited version of you that has been quietly running the show, is not who you are. It is a character you absorbed, a role you were handed before you were conscious enough to choose your own. And because it was absorbed, it can be released. Because it was inherited, it can be examined and outgrown. Because it operates through unconsciousness, it can be dismantled through awareness. And the financial freedom, the abundance, the version of your life that you know is possible, that is not waiting for the enemy within to disappear completely before it can show up. It begins to show up the moment you start seeing clearly, the moment you start choosing consciously, the moment you decide, one small act of awareness at a time, that the version of you worth becoming is worth more than the comfort of staying exactly where you are. This is just the beginning. In our next video, part 2 of this series, we are going to go even deeper into the School of Gods and explore one of the most mind-expanding concepts in the entire book. The idea that you are the dreamer of your own reality and what that means for everything you are trying to create. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because you do not want to miss that one. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this video. It truly means the world to me, and I hope this conversation brought you something real, something you can carry with you starting today. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. We have so much more to explore together. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You never know whose life you might change with a single video. The books that have shaped my journey and that I personally recommend are all linked in the description below. Go check them out. They are worth every page. And don't forget, there is a free PDF in the description on how to interpret angel numbers and equal hours. Grab yours. It is completely free, and it might just change the way you see the signs the universe has been sending you all along. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.